start the webinar, which it just did start.
Oh, no.
I didn't click that.
Oh, sorry.
I see that people are filling up the Zoom room now. Go ahead and let us know who you are and where you're zooming in from. We'd love to say hello. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. Thanks for joining the Penn State Alumni Association's virtual speaker series. I see Brian Peffley from Lebanon County. Brian, welcome. Elizabeth Andrus from Athens, Georgia. Thank you for zooming in with us today. We're going to be getting started in just a minute. Peter Sheridan from Reading, Pennsylvania. Peter, good to see you again. Where else would you rather be than a Zoom full of Penn Staters? I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual speaker session. Live closed captions are available for this event. You can access them by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of the Zoom video window and then clicking Show Subtitle. You may also customize your caption view by clicking the stream text link in the chat. We're live streaming today's presentation, which will be archived and available on our website after the event. Today's discussion is titled Engaged Research, Learning and Outreach in the Economics and Cost-Benefit Analysis of the Food Service System. Our guest today is Dr. Amit Sharma. He is the Edward Friedman and Stuart Mann Professor of Hospitality Management, the Associate Director of the School of Hospitality Management, and Director of the Food Decision Research Laboratory right here at the Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Sharma is also an affiliate faculty of the Teaching and Learning with Technologies and the Rock Ethics Institute. He teaches finance and economics, and his interdisciplinary research focuses on cost-benefit analysis, small business financing, and economics of the food service system. Dr. Sharma will share the outcomes of a recent research study that focused on understanding how and why restaurant performance was impacted during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. He will talk about the relevance and significance of this and other related research that focuses on small hospitality businesses. Dr. Sharma will also provide an overview of the ongoing research projects at the Food Decision Research Laboratory, which includes participation by undergraduate students and local community stakeholders. He'll talk about this engagement between students, faculty, and the local community, and how it's impacting the various stakeholders. Please welcome Dr. Amit Sharma to the virtual speaker series. Amit, turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, Paul, and thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon to you all, and good morning. So as Paul mentioned, would love to share some of the activities that we are engaged in, the Food Decisions Research Laboratory. The research that we are conducting, particularly for small businesses and restaurants in this case, that I'll share one of our recent studies, and also the work that we're doing with both graduate and undergraduate students in particular. So before I start, just wanted to give you a quick sort of, if not a definition, but an idea of what we are calling the food service system. If you think of food away from home, all the places that we go out and possibly can eat, and the system that supports that is what we are referring to the food service system. As you know, eating away from home is a significant part of our food budget and food activity. And so we believe there's a lot that we can learn from how we make decisions and choices in that system, not just as consumers, but also as providers of food. So today, I want to focus our discussion on three aspects. One, as Paul mentioned, we'd like to share some preliminary findings of a study that we've been doing or working on since the COVID pandemic. A little bit more about the Food Decisions Research Laboratory, the research projects that we are working on, and how students are involved and engaged in that, and how that engagement is translating into community engagement as well with our stakeholders. So, as I mentioned to you, the food service system that we're calling it has several aspects to it that we are looking at from various perspectives. So not just individual food choices, it's at the bottom of the left bottom of the screen, to how the local food system provides food to the consumers. What are the challenges that the local food system faces in connecting with food away from home? And to a few larger things like economic value added. How does this contribute to the economy? And also some of the most elementary nature or things in our economic system, such as land regulations or land use regulations. And we are also looking at ethical and moral behavior in the food system, particularly as it relates to the food service system and the sustainable development goals. So just a sort of a snapshot of the different types of topics that cover our research bandwidth. Some of the elementary aspects that drive our research is what we call transaction costs and benefits. As you would agree, transactions are probably the most elementary aspects of an economic system. And so we are interested in what types of costs and benefits would impact transactions within the food service system. And just to give you a sort of a holistic perspective of where we're coming from. So first, I want to share with you a study that we have done during the COVID crisis that focus on small restaurant performance, or what we call small and medium-sized restaurants. These are businesses that are not listed on the stock exchange and are relatively small in size, locally owned, sometimes often locally owned, but otherwise they may even be a part of a franchise system, such as the large franchise chains. So if you think about even the large franchise chains, the individual restaurants are still owned by local entrepreneurs. So they could be our neighbors, our friends who own these small businesses, but may be part of a larger system. And so we wanted to see how these small businesses were impacted during the COVID crisis. I was part of this team was Dr. Soki Lee from Penn State and Dr. Michael Lin from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So what did we look at? As you know, businesses require capital to start and even to grow. This is what we call a capital structure decision. Where do companies get money to start and grow the business? We know a lot about large businesses in this aspect than we know about small businesses. That said, more recently, that literature or that research area is beginning to grow significantly. And one thing that we are finding out is that small businesses are heavily reliant on what we call informal sources of financing. Or in other words, small businesses have challenges, or they face challenges in approaching banks for loans, or what we call the formal sources of finance. So they revert to other sources, such as they go to family, friends, other types of lenders, and even to supply chain or to people who are providing them input for their businesses. So they will get extended loans or financing and funding from these sources. While this is very helpful for small businesses, it does increase the risk. They makes them, small businesses, more vulnerable to risk. And so what we wanted to see was that could such sources of financing have made the small businesses so much vulnerable to risk during the COVID-19 crisis that it impacted them more than other businesses. So we wanted to see how the capital structure decisions that these businesses made prior to the crisis impacted them during the crisis. Our study design was a little bit different than most studies in the small business sector. We wanted to get information directly from owners. Now, this kind of data is not very easily available. And so we had to employ an agency to actually collect this survey data. These were self-reported surveys and based on the World Bank Enterprise Survey instrument, which is very well studied, has been for the last 3 decades. Our primary dependent variable, or what we call an outcome variable, was whether these businesses had experienced loss in revenue and profitability. And we also wanted to see whether the size of the businesses had an impact. Even within small businesses, there's a variation. There could be a very, very small business or a large small business. And we wanted to see if there was any nuances in that size spectrum. So here are 2 main findings of our study. What we found was that small restaurants that were primarily financed from family, friends, and third-party lenders, what we call FFRL, had a higher likelihood of losing revenues during the COVID crisis than did companies that did not have financing from friends, family, friends, and third-party lenders. We did not find a significant, what we call a statistically significant relationship in the loss in profits, but we think that could be because of several other factors. If you think about it, the revenue versus the profit, there's a whole income statement in between. So a lot could be happening between those 2 lines that our study did not capture. The second thing we wanted to see was whether the size had an impact, and what we found was the mid-sized small businesses within the range of $2 to $5 million were actually at a higher risk of losing revenues than were other businesses. Again, we did not see a significant relationship in profit loss. So what we are trying to understand out of this is that can informal financing support viable projects, or in other words, could there be a support for not so viable projects through informal financing? And when this really shows its true colors is during a market crisis. So we may not see that these projects are not so viable until actually we face a market crisis. We also think that the study points to other perspectives that we possibly could look at. As you remember, during the COVID crisis, the government extended grant funding to small businesses, and possibly that grant funding can be a little bit more targeted to small businesses that really need it because of certain factors, such as being supported from informal financing, therefore the higher likelihood of worse financial performance. Another thing that we are looking at after this study is that how can we continue to collect data directly from owners, because we really think that makes a bigger difference than collecting data from people who are not actually making money decisions in the business or financing decisions. Next, what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about the Food Decisions Research Laboratory. This is a space that I've been working on since 2013, almost a little over 10 years. And it's slowly grown to include not just researchers from the United States, but also internationally, and more importantly, graduate and undergraduate students. We focus on not just academic research, but also industry collaboration and industry research, service learning projects that we believe provide a really broad perspective and an interesting perspective to our students, and also engaging the local community with it. I'll talk a little bit about our digital badges in a minute, but as you can see, our collaborators are not just domestic, but international. And most times we are looking at this broader overarching goal of sustainable development goals, social, economic, and environmental impact. So this has been an interesting journey, and what I'm finding is that that having a process around it, which we have done, we have weekly meetings, we come together, we engage with each other, share each other's sort of challenges and pains in doing what we're doing in terms of our research projects, and have an exchange, a dialogue There's a lot of mentoring that goes on between graduate and undergraduate students, as it does even between researchers and the students. I want to recognize our team because always it's a team effort. But more importantly, I also want to recognize our graduate students and undergraduate students. As you can see, they are really the core part of our team, and that brings life to our discussions. So what I want to do is give you a few examples of the different types of collaborations that we have and the research projects that the students are working on, and even the researchers. One of the more recent industry collaborations has been with a company called Bear Robotics. We reached out to Bear Robotics because we wanted to get access to their what we call the survey robot or the serving robot. Serving robots are becoming more and more prevalent in the food service industry. If you haven't already interacted with a food service robot in a restaurant, then you likely will very soon in the near future. So what we did was we acquired the survey robot. It is now functional for a research project in Cafe Laura. So next time you're on campus, do look us up. We will have it running around. We're doing some research and also student engagement. And that's exactly what we wanted to do, get the robot to try and engage the students with it and try and understand what it means to have serving robots in restaurants. So as an example, what I did was we wanted to see how students react to the serving robot. So in this particular set of pictures, what we did, we first talked about the serving robot in the classroom, and we wanted to see how students reacted. And then I got them into the room with the actual robot. As you can, that's one of the pictures in the middle. May not be able to see it clearly, but then the robot was actually going to each student and engaging with the student. And then I wanted to see how that perception changed from being in the classroom versus being actually interacting with the robot. Maybe you can give me some clues on after the presentation what you thought the difference was. In any case, that brings to life some of the things that we talk about in the classroom, but also exposes students to a novel technology that they'll be working with very soon in the near future. The other thing that we have done is created research projects around the serving robot. So as you can see, we have identified 8 projects that range from anything between here, looking at owner's perspective, and then all the way to the employees as well as customer perspective. Several of these studies have already started. I would say half of them have already started, and the other half we're going to continue to work on through the summer and the fall semester. The idea is that we learn from understanding what robotics would do to the food service industry, and then also provide feedback to the industry and how they can continue to enhance this technology. As we were talking about the serving robot, and particularly in Cafe Laura, we had started to work on 2 studies. The question became, what are we going to call this robot? And so the students got really excited about it. We started to have some robust discussions about what it should be. If you were only a fly on the wall, you would smile all the way through, because there were just such interesting thoughts that came into mind. And we decided having a name for a robot actually is not that simple a thing. And so the students actually also in collaboration with one of our student members in Hong Kong Polytechnic, so this is an international collaboration amongst the undergraduate student, decided that they're going to work on a research project to identify how to name the robot. And so they came up with the research project. And in this case, what they're trying to understand is, how do you name a non-human object? They're looking at how we feel about this object. Is it more a functional feeling, or is it more trying to get such emotions attached to the robot? And then how will that impact how we think the name should be? The students presented this poster at our recent undergraduate research exhibition, and they're going to continue to do the study. I'm also hoping that they're going to take this research to an international conference that we are likely to go to Europe. The other aspect, as I mentioned earlier, is that how can we get students motivated to engage with the community, and also do learning projects that may or may not necessarily be even within the broader realm of the university. Obviously, we want to keep the students motivated and encouraged. What we've done is we decided to create micro-credentials. If you know about the micro-credentials are becoming increasingly prevalent in the industry. Industry, in fact, is employing people based on employable skills. And one of the ways that they judge the skill levels is through micro-credentials. So what we did was we created 3 micro-credentials for foundational, intermediate, and advanced research knowledge amongst undergraduate students. So as they complete these a certain level of tasks, they get these micro-credentials or badges. So I want to share a couple of projects for which our students have received micro-credentials, and they're very proud of it. We are extremely proud of those, both the students as well as the projects that they have done. So during the COVID crisis, we were working on an extensive project across countries, and a subset of that project was also focused domestically in Philadelphia, particularly. Several of our undergraduate students got involved in collecting data. Essentially, the focus of the project was hunger and food insecurity. And as the students were engaged in this project, it really got them very passionately involved in this in the phenomena of food insecurity and the food insecurity that people face here in the United States. Literally on the heels of that project, we started to engage with the local YMCA, and we wanted to see if we could help or support the YMCA's local free food drive. One of the things that the YMCA came back and told us was that what we really need from you is an educational, informational campaign for the local community to tell them that there is food insecurity even in places like State College, and then that we all of us as a community need to address that. So we posed this challenge to our students, and the students worked on this informational campaign. And what I'm going to show you is basically an outcome of what they developed as posters that now the YMCA is not just using locally, but also in their national campaigns. So essentially, the students came up with these informational posters. So as you will see on the one on the left, Julia, Megan, and Brett worked on the stigma associated with hunger and food insecurity. Megan, Alexandra, and Gianna worked on a poster informing Penn State students about the fact that there is insecurity, food insecurity, even on campuses. And then Jet, Miles, and Evan worked on the community level food insecurity and what it means for people around in our local communities. And then Liting, Xuan, and Jungji worked on a poster sort of depicting the experience of food insecurity. As you can see, that tagline is just so engaging. Can you hear my growling stomach? We're in fact thinking that we're going to continue with that tagline and add other type of material around it. So these are some of the sort of the outcomes of that project that the students were focused on. Another thing that we were doing around that time was also talking to our local food bank. And what we found, again, similar to what the YMCA had noted, was a lack of information. That the food bank told us that while the food banks exist, there are other sources of free food that people can get access to. And that information is not always available to people who come to the food bank. We looked at national level banks, and what we didn't find was the local nuances. Center County, State College, what are the places where people can find food? So again, we posed this challenge to the students, and we've decided that what we'll do is to supplement the national maps, the students will actually create a map that is starting from the local area. So the students started to work on identifying spaces in the State College area, and now they're growing it outward to include Center County, and then the idea is to cover the entire state of Pennsylvania. Madeline, Carrie, Tess, and Gwen started the project, and now Phoebe and Michael are taking it forward. We are hoping that this is going to expand. We're going to try and make this digital, and if it does, we can also extend it to our Commonwealth campuses, because as you all know, that there is food insecurity even on university campuses. And then finally, I wanted to share with you the last thing that our students are engaged with. Back in 2017, I launched my podcast called the All in Foods. The idea was simple: to engage again with the community, and share the research that we're doing that can be of value to us in everyday life. And so, as I've been working on the podcast, I wanted to see how we can again engage students to work with me and the podcast. It started with Louis, who was doing a retake of the podcast in terms of and writing blogs. And so what he wanted to do was listen to these podcasts and write a blog, his own opinions, and share it with the community. And now Sam is taking it over, and what he wants to do is actually do a retake of the podcast. So he's going to record podcasts as an sort of an extension of what we did in our prior recording. So that's a quick flavor, as I was talking to Paul, no pun intended, but a quick flavor of what we're doing in some of our activities here at the Food Decision Research Laboratory. Thank you. Paul, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. If you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A tab. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. But I want to kind of dive in. If you want to stop sharing your screen, I want to dive into just some of the lessons that we learned and some of the things that have come out of COVID, right? I think about, before COVID, like no contact purchasing was a convenience, and now it's part of every day. Maybe talk about how companies like Starbucks or the whole kind of the non-contact purchasing has become part of our everyday because of COVID.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And I'm actually going to include a question that we received also, to try and put those two things together in some ways. So technology has become an important part of the food service industry, and it's going to stay that way. I think not. I have my own experience, and maybe you can reflect on your own, that not having an online ordering system can make a difference in whether you would go to that restaurant sometimes or not. Sometimes you just really want that convenience. So online ordering definitely it's going to stay. Although it's going to, I think it's going to become a little bit better, more sophisticated, just like reservation systems did for hotels, if you remember, and even airlines. In terms of contactless, you raise a really good point. Food safety, hygiene is another factor. In fact, one of the studies that we are working on looks at how hygiene and food safety can influence customers' perceptions. A lot also has to do with trust, right? So building trust, so source of that information, whether it's trustworthy or not. So that's going to also continue to have an impact. So just the restaurant saying that this is who we are is not sufficient, because eventually what matters is what people feel. Yeah. And so we're constantly going to be influenced more by, what Paul, you said about that restaurant versus what the restaurant is saying about themselves. So I think that's why I think that's going to continue to keep us on our toes in the industry. That how do we keep that experience consistent? I'll throw one last thing in it. I think and how each of those two things, amongst other, gets influenced is labor. The cost of labor is going to continue has already increased, and it's not coming back down where it was. So how restaurants deal with these two, amongst other things, will also be a determining factor.
Yeah, I have a couple questions here that talk about exactly what you were just touching on there, and that's the employment market around food service. Not only is there, it seems like every place you go to eat now has a help wanted sign in the front window, but employee retention, employee engagement also seems to be down. Maybe that's in part because of all the competition that is in the marketplace right now. But talk a little bit about the workforce and food service and how that has changed pre-COVID to post-COVID.
So a lot is driven by the cost, and as the cost has increased, I think one of the lowest hanging fruits for restaurants was to look at their menu offerings. There was that time where you could open a menu and it would look like a book of several pages. So that, as you will note, has changed drastically. And that has a lot to do with the types of, with the amount of labor that's needed to produce and serve food consistently of the same quality of different types. So we'll continue to see some of that focus. The other aspect of that we're sort of still debating, and I won't say struggling, but we're trying to figure out, is this issue related to well-being? The 24-hour restaurants are not there for the most part. You don't see that many 24-hour restaurants. You see many restaurants that only open on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Right.
You see several restaurants that will close on Mondays. There used to be a time when we used to sort of frown on the Europeans for not opening on certain days, but it's happening here in the United States. We not necessarily open all 7 days. So I think some of those things we still haven't really worked out, and I think it'll continue to evolve as labor becomes a central issue.
Yeah, I've noticed post-COVID that there is not a hesitancy, but maybe more comfort in people picking food up and taking it home, right? So I imagine it's having an impact on how much real estate and how much dine-in space that restaurants actually need to be profitable. The prevalence of Uber Eats and DoorDash and the convenience of that. It seems like the food service industry, at least from a restaurant perspective, has changed from a let's go and eat and have an experience to let's get the food and bring it home and kind of be in our own environment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, you raised a other very important issue is rentals. As rentals continue to increase, or they have, that's another factor that's impacting margins and profitability. And so you're becoming far more conscious. Do you really need that kind of space? You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I also think about other kind of things that have popped up in food service, like I remember, just here locally in Center County, Big Springs Distillery over in Bellefonte was offering packets. It's almost like cocktails in a box, if you will, where they give you all the ingredients. You go pick up the box, you take it home, you make your cocktails. I think of like Blue Apron and HelloFresh that do that from a home meal replacement. Whole industries have kind of popped up that were like nice to haves or maybe special treats before COVID, that for now, some families and some people, it's become part of their every week habits.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, not it's so you're right about the cocktails. I mean, even pre-made cocktails,
Right.
Delivery. They sometimes they won't even charge you for delivery. So yeah, and so the other thing that has allowed this to happen is the regulations, and so we'll continue to see that moment also in terms of regulatory changes.
We have a couple questions here. Can you summarize again the findings of your research about COVID-19's impacts on restaurants?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we wanted to see was that if, depending upon how you financed the research, the project or the restaurant, could that have implications during a market crisis? And the reason for us to look at that was because small businesses in particular don't necessarily get a bank loan which is what we call formal financing. So small businesses have to go to oftentimes to family, to friends, to other lenders that are not necessarily in the financial market, and even get extended financing from suppliers. So they will negotiate longer payment terms with suppliers. And that's those are some of the usual ways that small businesses can get financing. And what we wanted to see was if that kind of financing would emerge as a higher risk for these businesses when there was a market crisis. Again, the reason was that such financing can make the small businesses more vulnerable to risk. And what we found was that restaurants that were primarily financed using funding from family, friends, and third party lenders had a greater loss in revenues during the COVID crisis than restaurants that were not primarily financed from this source. So, because we saw the impact on revenues more so than on profitability, one of the explanations was that is it possible that these projects would probably not be viable for, for the formal sources of financing? And therefore, they did not get that formal financing, but then went on to the next level of financing, which was the informal. So, in other words, should these projects have ever existed? If they had solely relied on formal financing, they probably would not have been in business. And so that is what the question that we are posing from these findings.
So another question coming in here from Brian, your professional opinion, how long will it take for the food supply chain to return to normal, or are we living in a new normal now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually posed that to recently to some industry colleagues, and what they're saying is that uh, so they tend to agree with the latter part of your statement, which is we are in a new normal in the sense that we have a normal, and that's kind of the normal we are in. So what is that new normal? The new normal is higher prices of the ingredients that they were countering versus the versus prior to COVID. And also, and this I don't have factual data, but we're hearing anecdotally that availability. So more and more restaurants are trying to find replacements. That could be either because of cost or because of quantities that they require may not be available. Now, how can we find different types of recipes to go in food prep, or can we replace it with certain other types of items? So I don't know if I answered that question very precisely, but it seems like more like a new normal. But primarily, what we do have information is the cost part. But what you don't have really anecdotal information is the availability of certain types of inputs.
So another question coming in, have you done or are you doing research about the impacts of how the customer is now being hit with being asked for tips with all restaurant transactions? Even if I pick up my own to-go sandwich at the sub shop, pizza shop, I only interact with the cashier, right? What is, tipping seems to have changed post-COVID.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, there's a lot of research that's emerging on how people are tipping if they were doing so with the tablet that I think that you're talking about, and without the tablet. So in general, what we're finding is that people are tipping more. In fact, they're tipping a lot more than they used to. Um, I wrote a blog several years ago on tipping and how tipping represents a certain way of how we feel about service employees and being in a service situation. But I think all of that is out of the door, because what we are looking at is that, all right, so I go and have a meal, and I have a meal of, let's say, I go and have a lunch and it costs me $9.50. And typically I would say, oh, I'll tip 10%. And I look at the counter and I say, wow, that's only 95 cents. Well, I can do better than that. And so I immediately increase it and I say, you know what, I'll do $1.50 or $1.60. that immediately gets it to about 20% of what my check is. Would I have done it otherwise without that tablet? I probably would have rounded it off, not because I'm being, mean about the service, but I wouldn't think twice. But
Sure.
now that makes you think twice that, oh, wait a minute, that 10% is nothing. It's not even a dollar. And so that I agree with, that's really having an impact on how we are tipping.
Yeah, it's even the suggested tip at the bottom of the receipt. I've noticed some places it starts at 20 and goes 22 and 25, right? So even the what is the right courtesy, right, in terms of the right amount. So
Yeah,
Amit,
absolutely.
I want to thank you for joining us today on the virtual speaker series. It's fascinating work that you're doing, and it brings fame to Penn State. And so we are truly grateful for all you do. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
And I want to thank everybody who has zoomed in with us today. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your support of the Penn State Alumni Association. As a reminder, you can view a full listing of all of our events online and in person at alumni.psu.edu/events. If you're a member of the Alumni Association, thank you so much for your support. If you're not a member yet, what are you waiting for? Go to our website at alumni.psu.edu, and you too can become a member of the world's largest alumni association. Thanks for tuning in and for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are
Penn State.